Welcome, doctor.
Hello, Michael. Hello, everybody. Great to be here with you on this Saturday.
All
I
right.
do have a presentation that I'd like to bring up to kind of go through the rainbow diet.
All right. We're excited to see it. The floor is yours.
Okay, here we go. Hmm. Okay. And by the way, a lot of the content that I'm going to be talking about here is found in my book, The Rainbow Diet, which just came out in February, hot off the press, very colorful, all color coded in terms of the different sections. So, what I'm going to tour you through is color and why color is so important. So, for some of you who were on yesterday, you learned that I have four basic premises when it comes to food and eating. They would be color, creativity, diversity, and rhythm. So I'm going to drill into the color aspect and give you some of the latest science and creative ways that you can bring more color to your diet, which means that you will have a more colorful life. So here we go. And by the way, you might want to pull out a piece of paper, a pen. I'm going to give you some tools as we go and maybe even walk you through a couple of activities if you're open to it. Please note that this is educational and not prescriptive. This is not meant to take the place of advice from your own practitioners. So, no diagnosing or treating. This is education and inspiration to take back to your healing team to have a conversation. All right, so here's my outline. I'm going to tour you through the spectrum. And because I'm very focused on color, I'm very focused on plants. So I'm going to be talking about plants and phytochemicals and talk about the latest science, and then put that information into action with some ways that you can bring more color into your everyday life. So let's first talk about plants. Why am I talking about plants? I've studied nutrition. I have, spent 3 years doing my master's, 4 years doing my PhD. I would even say that my nutrition information goes back to when I was 8 years old because my mother was really health conscious and raised us with this awareness around food and eating. And I would say that I kept coming back throughout my nutrition training to what has the most data, what is strongest, because what you see in nutrition is that people tend to arm wrestle. They arm wrestle data and they say, oh, there's no data for eggs. Oh, there's no data for soy. Oh, there's no data for this, or there's data for this, and quite honestly, as a scientist, what I can say is that you could cherry pick the data. There is so much data available through scientific publications. It's very easy for people to slant things in the way that they want it to go. But the one thing that I don't think you can arm wrestle effectively is eating more in the way of plants. Now, you might say, well, Deanna, what about anti-nutrients and lectins and oxalates and goitrogens? We'll get into all of that, but that's like a small sliver. I would say that the preponderance of data looking at chronic disease and looking at health and well-being really do center around plant foods. Now, of course, there's a lot of context to that, and we'll get into that. And I'm not just talking about fruits and vegetables. Let's expand your mind and be thinking about herbal tea, your spices, lots of different nuts and seeds if you're able to do those. Of course, don't take it in the way of that everything I'm mentioning that everybody can do, because in functional medicine, we honor personalization and individualization, right? Everybody's different. You might be different at different times of your life. But what I could see from the data is that there's a lot of data to support eating plants. And the reasons why are the following. Like if you were to say, okay, come on, just tell me what are like the top reasons? Well, if you just break them down in terms of nutrition, they're very nutrient dense, right? So you get a lot of potassium, you get a lot of magnesium. Just think of how many people are deficient in magnesium. We hear about that all the time, the connection between magnesium insufficiency and type 2 diabetes, magnesium and muscles, magnesium and sleep. Many people are low in magnesium, not to mention potassium as well, which is important for healthy blood pressure, healthy muscle relaxation and function, brain health. So those things are very important for us. Also vitamins. You know, you think about vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin D. There are certain micronutrients that are important as well as minerals. So when we think of micronutrients, typically I'm talking about vitamins and minerals. And so in plants, depending on what you're eating, if you're eating more root vegetables, you might get more minerals. If you're eating more leafy parts, you might be getting some minerals like magnesium, but then also some vitamins and some fibers as well. Now, what most people are just learning about, I would say over the past 10 to 15 years in nutrition, is that there is another class of compounds called phytochemicals. Phyto means plant, chemicals or nutrients would be the chemicals or nutrients within the plants. And it seems like these phytochemicals are playing many different roles in our bodies. They don't have calories, they don't provide energy in the way of caloric fuel, but there are thousands of them, and they're doing so many different things, like playing a role in our hormones, inflammation, our stress response. So we're going to get into that a little bit, and I'm going to tour you through all the different colors of food and all the different phytochemicals within those different colors. So the other thing is that plant foods, unless you overcook them, they tend to be anti-inflammatory, right? Or unless you're buying just regular conventionally grown plant foods, which can be laden in toxicants like pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides. So either you grow them on your own or you buy organic varieties. So there's kind of a knack to how to prepare plant foods. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about raw, steamed, cooked, overcooked, and what does that mean? So now some of you might be thinking, well, Deanna, I don't need studies to tell me to eat fruits and vegetables. Well, I think some of us need some inspiration or some creative ways to kind of bring back and understand why it's so important, because people are still eating what I call the white, brown, and yellow diet. And what that means is that many people are eating foods that actually accelerate their aging process through the process of inflammation. So when you see foods like you're seeing here in the screen, these are foods that have a lot of advanced glycation end products, meaning that when you have protein and sugar and you bring those together in the complex of heat, you start to get this brown color. You know, when I was at the university, I taught a course called food science, and there is what is called the Maillard reaction. So you have this browning effect that happens with cooking the fats. And that brown color, even though for us it may taste good, it's actually not very healthy. So in many ways, you can make food even more inflammatory just by how you cook food, right? So many people are still eating in this way of white, brown, and yellow. And as my mother used to say, the whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. I don't know who she took that from, probably Adele Davis or somebody, but there was some truth to that, even back in the 1970s when I was a kid. So overall, people are coming up short. Even the healthiest of us are still having occasions where we're coming up short. Maybe we're traveling, maybe we are working and we don't have a lot of time to prepare. So we're kind of eating on the run. We try to do the best we can, of course. You know, you don't have to be perfect or orthorexic or what we're trying to do here is come up with inspiring, creative ways to make eating fun. Right. But I do want us to all realize that most people are still coming up short when it comes to whole fruits. And we know that there's a connection between fruit intake, reducing the risk of things like depression. Okay, did you hear that? Because that's a little bit different than we normally think about with fruits and vegetables. Usually we hear about, 5 a day, help reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease and cancers of various types. But now what we're seeing is that different fruits and vegetables may also be helping us with mental health. The other thing is fiber. What we get with plants is fiber. You don't get fiber from meat. Now, I'm not saying not to eat meat, but what I'm saying is if you're only eating meat, like following a carnivore diet, you're not getting the necessary fiber that you need to nourish the gut microbiome. That's a really big deal. It's a big deal for your gut. It's a big deal for your brain, ultimately, to have that fiber. So we're still getting too little, is the takeaway. If you look at ancestral diets to see what people were eating back in the 20th century, the 19th century, you keep going back and you say, well, what were people actually eating at that time? What we see is that our gastrointestinal tract, our cardiometabolic, and our immune systems evolved on high fiber plant-based diets, which would be in excess of about 50 grams of total fiber per day. Now, that doesn't mean it was solely plant. It's not like they were vegan, but they were on high fiber diets. And that looked like wild berries, different fiber-rich edible plants. We just don't have the diversity of those plants like we used to, right? It has shrunken significantly, which has its implications. And also with the advent of convenience and convenient foods, processed foods, we kind of did away with a lot of the fiber because it kind of gets in the way of the processing of the food potentially. So fiber, even though you've heard it before and it doesn't sound like it's a new thing, what's new and what has been consistent is that we are still falling short in fiber. So the way that I was trained and the way that my orientation into nutrition is that indeed, food is medicine. It's actually a lot of things, right? Just think about this for yourself right now. What are all the things that food represents for you? So is that food is medicine, food is healing, food is connection, food is energy, it's fuel. Think about all the things that it does present for you. What I would say is that colorful, whole plant foods are nature's medicine. Not even plant-based, just plant foods, right? So look at this beautiful spectrum below of each of those colors. It's kind of like eye candy as well as nutrition for the body and soul. So usually when people say, oh, Deanna, you talk about eating the rainbow, what does that mean? Does that mean I can eat food dyes and candies that are brightly colored? Well, no. So let me just make that clear because when I'm talking about the rainbow diet, I'm talking about nature's colors, not human-made colors like you see here. Now, actually, I had 1 year for my birthday. My team had made and ordered a cake that was made from all natural food dyes. Like the red was from beets, the orange was from turmeric. Like there is a way to actually make a cake like this and use nature's colors, not synthetic food dyes that are problematic, right? So I just want to clarify that when I'm talking about the rainbow diet, I'm talking about nature's rainbow, not the synthetic rainbow that we have created through chemicals. But you all knew that, right? So plants are the ultimate eating unifier. So yesterday, Michael was asking me, hey, Deanna, what do you think about all these different diets out there? Well, the unifying stem of like almost like the stem of a plant, you have all these leaves of diets, right? There are going to be more. You know, just when you think you've heard all of the diets possible, there are more that will come up, right? We don't even have vegan on here. But all kinds of diets, to me, it doesn't matter. What we're looking at is the quality of the diet, and what runs through many of these eating styles is plants. And you would say, wait a minute, Deanna, what about the omnivore diet? That's eating meat. Well, guess what? What do animals eat? They have to eat plants, many of them. So we are still getting, even in small amounts, some aspect of plants, because quite honestly, 80% of the planet is this plant biomass. And I call plants smart. They're smarty plants, right? They hold the planet's intelligence. And when we eat that plant intelligence, It's better informing our own physiology and psychology. So to me, it doesn't matter. As long as you're getting plants on one of these eating programs, whatever is personalized to you would be most appropriate. Every time you eat, you're eating a universe of phytochemicals. Humans have not even codified all of the different biological, bioactive food compounds, all of these phytochemicals. We don't even really know how many there are, because there is what is in the plant. Then sometimes that changes when we're cooking it. And then it will further change when it gets into our bodies and the gut microbiome starts to work on all of those phytochemicals. We start to get a whole universe within our body of all of these metabolites. And sometimes when we take in the plant, it's not as active, but once it gets in the body and we start to convert it through the gut microbiome, it becomes even more active. So it's really hard to say how many phytochemicals we find in nature, but there is a general estimate out there of maybe something on the order of 10 to 25,000 different food constituents. So we're eating a lot of different things out there. And I think that nature is intelligent, right? And there's a reason why we have a certain ratio of compounds in a food. This has been referred to as food synergy, right? You've got all the different colorful compounds working together. Sometimes when we isolate one compound and we increase it, and that's separated from its matrix that it was in nature, now it has a different function, right? And sometimes it can lead to different effects, either therapeutic effects or toxic effects, which is why I always look to the plant in its perfect composition to provide us with the synergy of all of the different compounds. So that's why I am very much an advocate of the wholeness of plants. So when we think of the holism versus reductionism, it's not to say that it's not a good thing to reduce a plant into one thing, because if we just take turmeric, we take turmeric as a root, right? You go to the store, you see the turmeric, you buy it, you can grate it, you can put it into your smoothies, you can put it into a stir fry. But some people will want a little bit more of the anti-inflammatory impact of turmeric. They may need to have isolated curcuminoids in a dietary supplement, as an example. So this is sometimes where nature is used depending on what strength we want. Is it the everyday kind of we're chronically seeing that plant in its whole matrix form, or are we layering in a therapeutic targeted approach? And I do both, because sometimes you need a little bit more, but we have to realize that there are things to watch out for when we start to remove things from plants and just have it in isolation from all of the other family of compounds that that plant contains. So here you go. And I want you to think if there are other things that I could have put on this list. Here is a spectrum of plant options, some of the ones that I'm thinking about. There are edible flowers. And I'm curious, how many of you go to the farmer's market or order from a community-supported agriculture, CSA, where you get local food, you get local fruits and herbs, you get what is in season from the farmers and what is being grown? One of my favorites is spices. Spices are pretty fantastic. And I know I'm talking about the rainbow, and the rainbow also applies to tea, like herbal teas, as well as spices, and actually and even mushrooms. I didn't even put mushrooms are fungi. And so they're a little bit separate from the plants, but I kind of think about them as like a close relative, right? So we could even include them. I even did a rainbow of mushrooms on one of my social media graphics. I did a rainbow of spices. Actually, just recently, I put that on Instagram. You can have a rainbow of nuts and seeds, right? So it's not just fruits and vegetables. It's much broader than that. Now, I do want to just briefly talk about anti-nutrients, because some of you are probably thinking, oh, she's talking about plants, but I can't eat certain things. And, Probably, not all of us can eat all foods on the planet. That's just the nature of our bodies. And we have to be personalized and we have to be aware of those things. But people have come to me and said, Deanna, I don't think I can eat a lot of these plants because I thought that they were toxic. I thought that they had lectins and goitrogens that would impact my thyroid. And what about phytates? And what about phytoestrogens? Are these things healthy or are they going to change my gut, change my immune system? Well, actually, I was very curious about this for myself. So, one of my graduate students, Weston Petrosky, and I put together this review article where we looked at the science of anti-nutrients. They're called anti-nutrients for the most part because the idea is that some of these compounds may change up the nutrient levels or the absorption or compete with certain nutrients in our bodies. And what I have to say is that in the summary of the article, what we concluded was that basically many of us are eating foods outside of the traditional way that foods were eaten. I mean, just think about it. If we think back into the 19th century, how many people were having raw kale smoothies, right? How many people were having these different applications of foods and in high amounts? So when we start to change the traditional method of cooking and fermenting and soaking, we may start to see some other effects. But in general, we can modify the levels of those anti-nutrients, which actually tend to also be, if you flip them over to the other side to look at phytonutrients, some of them are actually quite medicinal. So it's all about the dose. It's all about the food preparation, and it's all about you and how those things interact. This is just a short list of some of the ones that I was mentioning. You probably have heard of lectins and oxalates and phytates and tannins. I mentioned phytoestrogens, goitrogens, and sometimes people talk about sulfur and not being able to tolerate sulfur, needing to follow a low FODMAPs diet. Well, I do think that if you have certain conditions, like if you look at the far right there, and Dr. Rajdani has done some great work on autoimmunity. Well, if you have an autoimmune condition, there may be an upregulation in your immune response to certain things. If you're having legumes and they're not completely cooked, or they're not cooked in the proper way of letting them soak and let a lot of the food kind of change its composition so that it's more digestible. And let's just say that somebody has poor digestion to begin with. Yeah, there might be some undigested proteins that may create an immune response. So just be aware of that it's not just about a food and pointing the finger to the food. We also need to look at what's happening in our guts. And is that food actually signaling that we have something going on in the body that needs to be addressed? So then down at the bottom there, you see that most traditional preparation methods, including cooking and boiling, soaking, fermenting, roasting, milling, and sprouting, have been shown to reduce the activities of some of these compounds. So when in doubt, definitely check with your practitioner in terms of looking at what foods you might be reacting to, because there are food allergy tests. There are ways to determine if you have a food intolerance. And, you got to listen to your own body. If you can't eat certain foods or you're prone to oxalates or kidney stones, yeah, it may not be a good idea to eat lots of Swiss chard and raw spinach, right? So it just behooves us to learn more about our bodies through the experience of eating. This is just, I'm not going to tour you through this. This is just kind of looking at the different anti-nutrients, their food sources, and some of the things that have been documented or some of the potential concerns that people have. So again, the preparation tips, I think it's important to, again, look at how we're cooking things and do our best to cook them well. And also kind of balance that with maybe there are certain things that need to be eaten more raw. right? It's not just only cooking and cooking one way for all foods, as you can imagine. I also think that people get into food ruts. How many of you just eat the same thing over and over and over? Maybe you don't even realize it, but let's just say, you get in your routine, you've got your daily rhythm, and you don't really have something that kind of kicks you out of the box of just doing the same thing, right? When I see that people are in a food rut, eating the same thing every day, many times it tells me they're in a life rut. And what we benefit by is rotating foods. Every 3 to 4 days, it's a really good idea to start to rotate. Even if it's a small amount of rotation, but having small amounts of a variety of whole foods rather than, for some people, they just say, like, I can only have 10 foods. That's all I can have. Right. So I think it's important for the gut and building better gut health by having smaller amounts of whole foods. All right, so hopefully I made the case for plants and I saw it with you from different angles, even looking at anti-nutrients, right? And the personalization aspect. What I want to do here is talk about newer documented effects. So I want to look at how can we go beyond antioxidants? I'm sure you've heard of plants being important because they are a source of antioxidants. That's kind of it's an older term, but in general, plants can help us with a number of things. One thing is that they supply us with antioxidants. So things like vitamin E, vitamin C, polyphenols. I want you to know what those are. Polyphenols are plant compounds found in tea and also berries and apples and certain vegetables, and carotenoids, which are things like beta carotene, alpha carotene. So, in general, plants can give us antioxidant compounds outright. Then, what we can also do is those plant compounds, certain of them can help to increase our internal antioxidant defense. Now, the only thing I want to mention here is some people like to take antioxidants as a supplement. And again, just isolating one of those antioxidants, like taking beta carotene in a high amount and just having that without other carotenoids, right? Again, it takes me back to food synergy. And that's why even taking vitamin C as a supplement, what I think is perhaps a better approach is more of a whole food form of vitamin C, where you also have bioflavonoids to support the activity of vitamin C. The other thing that I think we all need to be thinking about is the toxin load that we're up against. Indeed, this planet is presenting us with toxins in food, air, and water. Things like toxic elements, things like mercury and arsenic and lead and cadmium, things like phthalates and bisphenols, right? The plastics, things like persistent organic pollutants, POPs, right? So what, and even if we buy organic isn't 100% pure, right? It's still going to have, just by way of the environment being toxic, still going to have some contamination. So what's important here is that we want to reduce the inflammation that can happen as a result of increased toxin load. Some of the ways that we can do that is through some plant compounds like polyphenols. And in this article, they were also talking about omega-3 fatty acids, which are very important to help with the balance of inflammation in the body. The other thing that plants can give us is folate, vitamin B9, and that can help us with the removal of certain toxic elements like arsenic. By the way, arsenic is one of the #1 toxins that we have to deal with. Some of the, and arsenic occurs in water, in food like chicken, apple juice, and rice. And it's in the environment, right? It's just in the air as well. And arsenic is connected to things like increasing the risk for type 2 diabetes, And many times when we think of rice, we think of the high glycemic load, but also the arsenic content of rice, which could be impacting the risk for type 2 diabetes. What I find to be inspiring is that plants have been shown to help with mental health. So, eating more fruits and vegetables, believe it or not, has been associated with less psychological distress and better mood. So, if you haven't been in a good mood lately, look at your plate. What are you eating? Is it colorful? Colorful foods make for colorful moods. There are a number of studies now showing that adolescents, children, different people of different ages are being impacted psychologically and in a good way by foods that they're eating. And one of the foods that we're going to talk about with brain health and better mood is blue purple foods, which is a color that most people don't get in the daily diet. So what you can see here is, I'm just going to move that as you eat more fruits and vegetables, what tends to happen to life satisfaction, right? Look over here on the far left. So satisfaction with one's life goes up when your fruits and vegetable servings go up. So there's a sense of contentment, a sense of satisfaction, well-being that we see when people are eating more fruits and vegetables. The other thing that's quite interesting is that eating plants is associated with happiness, life satisfaction, and well-being. And if you say, well, Deanna, like to what degree? Like somebody just has a general feel-good experience. Well, actually, the psychological level that's been measured as is transitioning from not having work to having work, especially if somebody's stressed out about that, right? And so having up to 8 servings per day of fruits and vegetables is positively associated with well-being. So again, ask yourself the question, how do I feel? Colorful foods, colorful moods. The other thing I wanted to mention here is that more research is coming out on why it's important to eat foods in season. Okay, so depending on where you live, you may need to adjust this a little bit. But here is an animal study where the researchers were looking at, now this was in animals, right? So this wasn't in people, but what they did was they changed the environment of the rats so that it would mimic either summer or winter. And then they gave them oranges that were grown in either the northern or the southern hemisphere. And what they found, very interestingly, and this is just even after 10 weeks, is that when the winter group was given the orange that was in the southern hemisphere, like it would be summertime, that they showed some changes in fat accumulation. Now, keep in mind that these amounts are probably more than most people are eating, and it was every day, right? They also found that oranges that were grown in the summertime in the southern hemisphere differed in their composition compared to oranges grown in the northern hemisphere, which is really fascinating, isn't it? So what we're learning is that certain foods grown in season are rich in certain compounds that can potentially connect into certain centers of the brain that regulate metabolism, right? And so looking at that light-dark cycle, the seasonal rhythm, our polyphenols that we take in, and those two things coming together through this change. So when we're eating out of season, it may lead to metabolic dysregulation. So ideally, if you can, it would be important to eat local and in season. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting is that if we're thinking about the brain and we're thinking about neurotransmitters, we think about hormones, what we see is that plants actually contain their own neurotransmitters. So it's interesting because plants don't have a brain like we do, but yet they contain things like acetylcholine, which many times we think about in relationship to memory, You can see here some of the foods that would contain that. We also see that they contain glutamate, GABA, dopamine, serotonin, histamine. So plant foods are very, I would say, active. And I don't know if we completely understand why plants contain these neurotransmitters and how they interact in our bodies. But I think it's of interest to note that we're eating a lot of phytochemicals, potentially with some activity in the gut and elsewhere. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about what plants are doing, because there are some newer things. They're doing many different things. They wear many hats. They're pleiotropic, many, tropic, function. They're doing many functions. And I would say that the top three of what plants are doing because of what they contain is they're helping with inflammation, they're helping with insulin and other hormones, and they're helping our cells to deal with stress. So I made this table here of the many different things that plants are doing. Yes, those are the top three things, but there are a number of things that they're doing actually. Certain plant compounds, when we eat plants, those compounds travel to certain parts of the body and then they have a function. So for example, when we eat something like kale and spinach and even things like just any kind of green leafy vegetable or basil or cilantro has lutein in it. Lutein is found in the macula, in the eye. And so there's a reason why it's there. It's to help us, to protect us from things like blue light exposure, right? To preserve the eye. We also know that many of these phytochemicals play a role in helping the cell to communicate better. So for example, cinnamon, we know, is an insulin sensitizer. Green tea catechins, we know, are important for things like helping to support healthy body weight. And a lot of these plant compounds are important for the gut microbiome. They help with DNA repair and even epigenetics. You probably have heard a bit about that. So how do you know if you're eating enough plants? Many people have what's referred to as the phytonutrient gap, meaning they're not getting that full quantity of color. They may also be in a rut where they're eating the same colors over and over. In general, the evidence suggests that having fruit and vegetable intake can reduce the risk of chronic diseases, and the goal would be to aim for 5 servings per day. Right, just 5 servings per day. When people were surveyed some time ago, what they found was that most people were falling short in purple blue compounds. I want you to think right now for yourself. Think about your breakfast. Think about the colors that it had. Were you missing a color? If you think of the rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, white, brown, tan, what colors were you missing in your breakfast, right? And as you move through your day, are you getting the other colors? That's really important. The problem a little bit is that we don't know about the exact phytochemicals that we're eating, because if we look at a label on a product, or we're picking up something in the produce section, we don't actually know what levels of phytochemicals, right? We can look at the fiber content, and we're starting to learn a little bit more about the different phytochemicals as they're listed in the nutrient database, but typically we don't really see that on food labels, so it's hard to know what we're getting. All right, this is the big family tree of phytochemicals, and I think that this is some good information and will help you to navigate foods and phytochemicals a little bit more. So this is like a family tree of phytochemicals. Remember how I said that we take in something like 10 to 25,000 plant compounds, and those compounds aren't necessarily vitamins or minerals. They are separate compounds. What we see is that there is, I want you to pay attention to this category all the way to the left, because if you're ever on social media or you're listening to different media alerts and press releases, what we're finding out is more about phenolics, phenolic acids, the flavonoids, how important these things are for the gut and the brain. The other ones that you might want to be looking at is alkaloids, which are in coffee. If you like coffee, coffee is chock full of different phytochemicals, actually. Nitrates, which are in green leafy vegetables. Sulfur compounds we think of with the brassica vegetables, the cruciferous vegetable family. Phytosterols, there's a whole bunch of different ones there. And the carotenoid family, which I've already mentioned, like beta carotene, alpha carotene. I'm going to talk about those again, but actually there are 700 different carotenoids. We don't see them all here, and we don't see all of the other compounds either, but this is just kind of the lay of the land in terms of the different phytochemicals. So, you know how we have the glycemic index, and then people started to become aware of their glycemic intake, and how if you have a high glycemic index, that typically means that the food would lead to a huge spike in blood sugar. Well, now we have a dietary phytochemical index, and ideally we want our phytochemical index to be high. We want more phytochemicals. When that phytochemical index is higher, the research shows better body mass index, better waist circumference, better waist to hip ratio, and better levels of antioxidants and reduced oxidative stress. So eventually we'll have an app or some way that we can look at the quick, I would say the cumulative summary of our phytochemical index from our day of eating. The other thing that I know Michael knows from what I talked about yesterday is that it's really important that we diversify. And in the literature, there's a lot about the dietary diversity score, looking at people's diets and scoring them based on how diverse they are. If you look at the ancestral diet, what you see is that it averaged at about 3,000 plant species. In our modern diet, there are about 400 plant species, but only about 100 are eaten as food. Think about yourself right now when you go to the grocery store or you go to the farmer's market. Count up and see if you can see how many plant species you actually expose yourself to in a week. I think for most people like to get something on the order of 50 unique plants in a week. But it's something we have to keep top of mind. We have to say, okay, I have to make sure I'm not eating the same thing every day. Because when we eat diversely, we can have different health benefits. And this is just a short list, but better blood pressure, systolic blood pressure especially, better DNA health because we have less oxidative damage, even less risk of falls. And there's a whole body of literature here. It's even better mood, better immune health, better gut health. So make sure that you change things up. Get the color and change up the colors. And adding just one food or one spice has been shown to have significant physiological impact. So don't think that, oh, just adding a little bit of spice on my meal isn't really that important. It's very important. Adding spices to your meals actually helps your meals to taste better and gives you more nutrient density and increases your dietary diversity. I actually did this in a meal and I tried to make this like a game. So I have a Facebook group and often I'll do different programs and I'll say, okay, some time ago we did this where we tried to see how many diverse plants that we ate in a week. And one woman had 232, which is really good. I had like 120. So, but well, you've got to think about it. You've got to be intentional about it. And one of the ways that I was able to get 31 unique plants in one meal was because I loaded up my plate with spices. So my curry powder has 11 spices in it, right? So right there, that's 11. So it's not so much about the amount. Focus on the quality and the diversity. I think in nutrition, people have been taught to look at serving sizes, focus on the amount, focus on the calories. This is kind of old school nutrition. What we need to look at is the amount is one thing to consider, but it is not the only thing. We need to look at the diversification of our eating, the personalization of our eating, and even when we eat is very important. So lots of different publications on dietary diversity, and people that eat more diverse diets tend to be more nutritionally complete or have a better nutritional status. And we know that there's a connection to the gut microbiome. So a healthy gut microbiome is one that comes from a diverse diet. So what you want in your gut is, if you imagine like your gut like a terrain, right? We have a gut terrain. We have this earth within us, metaphorically speaking. Well, how do you create a healthy garden? You want a polyculture. You want different plants that can help the other plants, right? Same thing with the gut. The gut needs diversity. So here, looking at gut microbiome diversity in food, the more diverse the diet, the better the gut microbiome will be to changes, right? So look at the title of the article that's cited here. A healthy gastrointestinal microbiome is dependent on dietary diversity. It's dependent on it. So for those of you who have poor gut health, are you in a food rut? Are you eating the same stuff day after day? You know, usually people cycle between something like 5 to 7 different recipes in a week. I would say change it up. If you like stir fries, change up what's in that stir fry. Get one new vegetable for the week. Or bring in a soup where you can change up what's in that soup. Add in different spices than you normally get. Maybe gift yourself to a different spice, because, you know, check out your spice rack. Many people have crusty old spices in their spice rack. I gotta say, because I have done home visits before where I go and check out people's kitchen and look at their foods and how is the food stacked in the refrigerator? Where do you have things? How do you eat? The thing that I find over and over again is people do not replenish their spices. They don't pay attention to the expiration dates, and they tend to put their spices close to the oven, which is not a good idea. The stovetop is too hot and too much heat, and then you start to lose the potency of spices. Spices need to be kept in the dark and in a cool space, like in the cabinet. Some people have those nice drawers in their kitchen where they pull out the spices. That would be a good way to do it. So when it comes to your gut, I want you to think of the 3 Ps, right? If we look on the left, prebiotic fibers. We need fiber. I can't stress this enough. And we need all kinds of fibers. We need the mop kind. We need the broom kind, the kind that kind of soak up water and kind of hold things and kind of allow for the slow release of sugar into the body. And then we need the kind that act like a broom and just sweep away things, right? Or bind toxins. So make sure you're getting food sources of prebiotic fibers and get diverse ones. I'm just showing a little list here, but think of the supplemental ones too, like apple fiber, psyllium, flaxseed meal. I just posted a study on my Facebook page that was about looking at flaxseed meal in people with fatty liver and how it was important for helping with health status. So you can look at that if you want the details. In the middle, we look at probiotics. So all the different fermented foods that naturally have different compositions of microorganisms, whatever you can do there. Some people can't do dairy, some people can't do soy. Some people actually have an issue with fermented foods because they may have gut overgrowth, right? Where they have a lot of microorganisms. It's not a very healthy gut. And so if they have fermented foods, sometimes it doesn't sit well for them. I lost there?
Yeah, Dr. Meg, just to start your video again. There you go.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So some people ask me, how many diverse species we need to have? Well, there is a research project. It's a citizen science microbiome research project. It's called American Gut. You can actually just Google it, go online, and you can read more about it. One of their findings was that people that eat more than 30 plant types versus those that have less than 10 have better short chain fatty acid fermentation. Now you're thinking, well, is that a good thing? That is a good thing. You want short chain fatty acids in your gut. You want the butyrate, right? You want these things that help to signal a better immune system, a better gut health, better brain health, all from eating a diverse diet. So do a contest. This is a fun thing to do at home, is just track the diverse things that you're eating through the week. There is some research to suggest that you will help your immune system by having food diversity. You help to decrease food allergy. And also for children, when they are started on a diverse diet earlier in life, they have less risk for developing allergic or autoimmune disease later in life. So there are lots of health benefits. I bet this is kind of an aha for some of you, right? In terms of just their latest science on dietary diversity. So this is a summary of the benefits. So number one, better gut microbiome adaptability. Who doesn't want a better gut, right? Also, there was a study looking at when the gut microbiome is more diverse, that's associated with less arterial stiffness in women. So that's a cardiovascular relationship. Improved nutritional and antioxidant status. It's protective against cardiometabolic dysfunction, especially high systolic blood pressure, lower risk for metabolic syndrome, less mental health issues such as anxiety and even depression, better cognitive function. Very important, right? Who doesn't want better memory, better capacity to learn, less allergic diseases, better visual and auditory sustained attention. So many people are struggling to stay focused, right? So again, diversity potentially can be important for that. Less risk for impaired function and risk for fractures, and it's important for bone health too. So I think you get the drift of where I'm going here with dietary diversity. Lots of research to support this. This is an interesting study. Let me just kind of showcase this quickly. So some people will say, well, is it diversity or do I just need to have my 8 to 10 servings of fruits and veggies? Well, as it turns out, it's not just having the number of servings, it's having diversity within those servings. This study in women, they had two groups of women. They were both given 8 to 10 servings of vegetables and fruits per day. But in one of the groups, they had more diversity than the other. And what they found was that the group of women that were given the more diverse diet actually had a better reduction in DNA oxidation, which is an important feature, right? We don't want our DNA to be damaged. And having the more diverse diet actually helped to protect the DNA. So I have different ways. Here's one of the tools I mentioned to you. I want to make this easier for you. So if you see this QR code up in the far right, what you do is you put your camera on it. You can hover over it and then you'll get a link. And through that link, you can download my variety tracker that I created. I kind of give you the instructions for it. And I based it on the one you see on the left, which was, I found this article that was published, who is, this person is now a colleague of mine, Miguel Toribio Mateus, and he talked about the 50 foods that you should track. And what I did is I took that and then I put it into categories. So you see here, vegetables, fruit. This is so you can keep it all straight, right? So if I had a banana today, I would write down banana under fruit. But then tomorrow, if I'm doing this for 7 days, right? Then if I have a banana tomorrow, I can't put it on this list because it's redundant. I've already had it. It's not diverse. But let me give you an example. If you have apples, and let's just say you go to the store and instead of buying a bag of Granny Smith apples, you buy one Red Delicious apple, one Fuji apple, one Pink Lady apple. So you get 3 diverse apples. You can list those 3 apples on here under fruit. But if you ate 3 Red Delicious apples, that doesn't count because it's the same variety. So you can kind of see how this works, right? Not have to be analysis paralysis. It should be fun, inspiring, and very soulful and creative. All right, all right. Also, one thing I always get questions about is about children. And this is a great activity that you can also do with kids. When kids are presented with more variety, they actually will have more intake of vegetables. So this was a study in which they had presented kids with either a single vegetable or 3 different vegetables, right? And what you see in both conditions is that the total amount of vegetables were greater in both situations because there was variety. So keep that in mind. If you want kids to eat more vegetables, they need options. They get inspired through variety. It's just human nature, right? We like things to be different. And we usually, that's why in health, many people are looking at, well, like what's new? What's the latest? Because we like variety. So, during the pandemic, I was taking pictures of my lunches and my meals. This is my favorite blue plate. And I was just showing people like some of the different things that you could do with bringing in colorful foods and diverse foods. So I would say to try that on your own. Okay, so this is just something, with different colors of food, there are different phytonutrients. I'm going to kind of move past this a little bit because I'm going to come back to that when I go through each of the colors. The colors of food are also associated with antioxidant level. So if you're having more antioxidants, you are going to be protecting the body, protecting the cell, protecting potentially the DNA. And even though I want you to eat the whole spectrum of colors, there was this one study that showed that red, blue, and purple foods were shown to be the highest in total antioxidant capacity. Keep in mind that most people are not eating that blue, purple color of food. They're getting red, but not blue, purple. So to keep that in mind, that you're missing out on some pretty potent antioxidants and high amounts of antioxidants when you forego those colors. Well, I do think that we need to think about the different colors of food, the different phytochemicals, and the code, our human code to those colors. And I'll show you what I mean, because I'm going to take you through each color, and every color connects to a function in the body. And that's what I'm going to talk about here in the Eat by Color approach, which actually, again, I do talk about in my Rainbow Diet book. I go through each of the colors. I give you a list of the different foods, and then I go through the recipes for each of those colors. All right, so I published a scientific article to establish the connection between the colors and the different impacts that it's having in the body. So red foods typically means that those foods are going to be helpful for the immune system and to help with inflammation. Orange foods typically we're seeing are helpful for protecting things like our hormones, our adipose tissue, our reproductive health overall. Yellow foods helping us with acids and enzymes to help with that digestive fire. Green foods for cardiovascular health to help open up the blood vessels, the vasculature, to give us the folate, to give us the magnesium we need for circulation. and then blue purple for brain health. And that is the rainbow diet color code that I talk about in the book. I also bring in other colors in the book, though. I do talk about tan, I talk about brown, and I talk about black, and I talk about white. So I do bring in some of the other colors. But for today, I'm just going to go through some of these colors that are just top line. So right now in the chat, I'd love for you to write in your favorite color today. If you think about all the colors, especially the colors of a rainbow, natural colors, what color is really speaking to you today? Why don't you write that in the chat? And it might change. For some of you, you've always had the same favorite color. Others of you are just, okay, you're going to wear a certain color on a certain day, kind of gives you a certain feeling. You know, color is psychological, and it is also, it has some healing, right? So I'm just going to take a peek at the chat just to see what people are writing. Green, green, blue, blue, purple, yellow, orange, good, turquoise, all right, yellow, blue, fabulous. Usually when I survey audiences, the most popular colors are blue and purple. And then I'm in the green camp. I love green. Some people like red a lot, but it's not often that you see people, you know, some of the other colors, not as much. My niece, it was really funny when she was first born. I wanted to ask her when she was finally able to talk what her favorite color was. And she kept saying purple, purple. So, you know, kids know their favorite color. Even adults know their favorite color too. All right, so keep in mind that as we go through each of the colors, talk about some of the phytochemicals that coincide with those colors, right? Because there's a reason for the color. The colors connect to wavelengths of light, this nanometer of light that would be connected to some of these compounds, right? So your eye is seeing certain things to give you a sense of that color. So let's go through each of the rainbow. This is kind of a fun thing I did on a Saturday, kind of like today. I thought I would rainbowify my refrigerator. So I took everything out and I started at the bottom there with kind of a brown. I put things in here that I normally would not put in the refrigerator, by the way. And some things I don't even eat now. I did this a couple of years ago, but you could see down at the bottom, like the earthy browns, moving on up to the reds with beets and apples. Then we have oranges and yellows here with carrots and onions and radicchio and sweet potatoes. And I think I even had lemons and maybe even a squash here. And then lots of greens. I don't think anybody suffers for lack of greens. They're easiest to get because there are the most varieties available, right? So you see how I have purple grapes here? When you have the ability to choose a purple variety, that's an important thing to do because purple is precious. We don't find a lot of purple foods and we lack the purple phytochemicals. So up in the purple section here, we have, I think those are figs, blueberries. Of course, I call that purple cabbage and not red cabbage. And then white. So mung beans, bean sprouts, macadamia, nut milk, coconut water, and yogurt. So just some ideas there. That's a fun activity to do. So let's start with red. So if your favorite color is red, you're going to be pretty happy because we're going to talk about red and what it gives for our health and well-being. In the rainbow diet, I talk about red being the code for inflammation. Now, that means a lot of different things, right? There are certain aspects of red foods that are high in antioxidants. They give us certain carotenoids. They tend to be anti-inflammatory. They help us with our immune system. And you know what? In part, that's because many red-colored foods actually tend to be high in vitamin C. And so vitamin C is important for the immune system. Red colored foods may assist with reducing inflammation and helping immune status. We think of watermelon, apples, cherries, cranberries, pomegranate, and raspberries. So here's kind of a list. And again, in the Rainbow Diet, I kind of break this out, nice charts and tables to keep all of this straight. Here's the red here. We see some of the fruits. And let me know if I've missed any, because, I have a pretty extensive shopping list of each of these colors. Some things aren't widely available, like lingonberries. You really have to look for those. Vegetables, phytochemicals. What are the phytochemicals that are found in the red food group? And then what are the physiological effects? Anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, immune. Tomato. So I'm going to just kind of shine a light on certain of the different colors of food and some of the research. Now, the thing about red is it's like a double-edged sword. It can be really good for certain people because of its immune anti-inflammatory effects, but in other people, it can actually provoke inflammation. Like, I don't know if you're one of those people who can't do nightshades. Maybe you avoid tomatoes. Maybe they make you turn red with pain and swelling in your joints, right? So again, this speaks to that not all foods for everybody. But tomatoes have been pretty well studied as part of the Mediterranean diet. They've been studied as raw, juiced, and even as lycopene in isolated format. In fact, part of my graduate study was looking at the role of lycopene in helping with oxidative stress in athletes. So yes, lots of good things in tomatoes, but you can find lycopene in other things like pink grapefruit and guava. Not as easy to get. Tomatoes are a really good source. Tomatoes are also known for their vitamin C content. They have flavonoids. Flavonoids are just part of the polyphenol category. And again, the lycopene. But they are part of the Solanaceae botanical family. So they are part of the nightshades. So for some people that are sensitive, you want to avoid them. There is some research on reducing inflammation using tomato juice or even tomato other products, whether it's tomatoes themselves, tomato sauce, tomato paste. And this seems to be helpful, especially in some of the studies as it relates to heart health. And here's a little tip. If you want to absorb the lycopene in your tomato sauce, make sure you add olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, to help with the absorption. Strawberries. If you can handle strawberries, some people do get a histamine response from strawberries. I think it's kind of common for children to have a reaction in some way to strawberries. Sometimes they get a rash. I've seen that before. But strawberries are pretty chock full of many different compounds that are important for us. Now, strawberries tend to be high in pesticides. So you do want to get organic when possible. So that's just, when it comes to berries, organic. That's pretty important. And it's also important to get, if you look at wild strawberries, they're really small. The more commercially grown strawberries, even if they're organic, they tend to be really big. So the bigger the fruit, the more dilute typically some of the nutrients are. So when they're really small, they're going to be more flavorful. That flavor is connected in some ways to the phytochemicals. So just keep in mind that it's not always important to have big. Sometimes the smaller foods tend to be more nutrient dense. And I think of that with strawberries. So strawberries are a source of anti-inflammatory polyphenols. You might have seen this word already circulating, anthocyanins. This is just a class of polyphenols, really important for gut health. There was a study, actually, I think 2 studies that looked at when people had a specific strawberry drink that was consumed before a meal, that it helped to reduce the inflammation from a meal. Studies showing reduced pain and less inflammation in those with knee osteoarthritis. And as I mentioned, just note that strawberries do contain histamine, a natural form of histamine, which may be a problem for those who can't break down histamine in their gut. So they have to have a low histamine diet. Now, that's not the majority of people, but I do like to mention it in case people say, I can't eat strawberries. I don't know why. Well, it may be because of histamine. And actually, vitamin C can help with the histamine breakdown. What about beets, another great red food? Beetroot is rich in betalains, which can be helpful in inflammation and oxidative stress. And both raw beet juice and cooked beetroot. So, if you take that root and you just cut it up, and here's where you steam it, kind of do some boiling. If you consume it like that, both forms have been helpful for reducing inflammation. And that was in a small study with people with high blood pressure. So important to have beets. I don't like a lot of juice on a raw stomach. If you're going to have juice, make sure you have it in a cooked meal. Cherries. Now, I keep a couple of juices in my refrigerator in case I need them. And one of them is Montmorency cherry concentrate. So when we think of helping with things like gout or inflammation, because cherries are such a great source of things like polyphenols, vitamin C, they seem to be important for helping reduce inflammation and helping with recovery from physical activity, like if we overextend ourselves. I'm sure that you know about gout and helping with gout inflammatory symptoms, reducing serum uric acid concentrations. And there might also be an effect of cherries with helping with insomnia, although you don't want to have any kind of food too close to bedtime. So just note that. But there may be the polyphenols in the cherries, or even some of the minute amounts of plant melatonin may be conducive to helping us with sleep. All right, anybody like orange? Because we're going to talk about orange and reproductive health. Orange foods, they tend to be high in carotenoids, especially beta-carotene and beta-cryptozanthin. And, when I was growing up, my mom, because she was kind of this health nut, if you will, she ended up drinking a lot of carrot juice and eating a lot of carrots. And what happened? She turned orange. Yeah, her skin turned a hue of orange, especially the palms of her hand and the soles of her feet. Now, that's not necessarily toxic, and eventually it went away. But the reason why that happened is because these colorful compounds collect in fat tissue. So they're going to collect in the skin. They're going to collect in the certain parts of the body that are just higher in fat. So they like fat. And that's also a way to remember that when you're eating orange foods, to help with the uptake, many times you need fat. The lesser known functions of some of these orange foods is that they may play a role in the menstrual cycle for women. So the ovaries contain 13 to 14 different carotenoids, and they may play a role in healthy ovulation. They may also play a role in reducing the risk for insulin resistance. So for somebody who is looking to their hormones, looking at fertility, and helping with reducing oxidative stress, what we know is that the orange foods, because of their antioxidants and their connection with reproductive health, that these might be of importance. Well, we're not going to get into all of this, but basically the carotenoids are these long chain compounds, right? They're kind of long and they kind of look like fats, actually, which is why they work really well with fats. The red, orange, and yellow compounds that are fat soluble, these carotenoids, are important. As I mentioned, they're contained in the fat tissue. They're also in the brain, and they're protective in the brain. They're in the breast, they're in the skin, and they're in the cell membrane. So as a result of being in the cell membrane, they can actually help the cell to perform better, and they can help with immune dynamics and just the fluidity of the cell. Some of the carotenoids, like beta-carotene, can also convert to some extent to vitamin A. Now, if you're a vegan or you don't eat any animal products, then you are relying upon your beta-carotene from your diet to give you vitamin A. In about 50%, in a good case scenario, 50% of beta-carotene converts to vitamin A, which is otherwise known as retinol. And we need vitamin A for a number of things. As I mentioned, carotenoids, these orange, typically orange and yellow carotenoids, are in the ovaries. And in fact, this study was very interesting, looking at 14 different carotenoids in the ovary itself, including provitamin A carotenoids like beta carotene. So here's the short list. Orange, here are some of the fruits to be thinking about. So when was the last time you had a persimmon? When was the last time you had a kumquat, right? These are fun. Vegetables, lots of different ones, especially for the autumn. Lots of tubers and sweet potatoes. Phytochemicals, this is a short list, and some of the things that it's doing, right? I'm going to shine a light on some foods to think about. So wild yam. Well, for those of you who are women who are going through perimenopause and menopause, wild yam is typically discussed because of its phytoestrogenic activity. And in fact, in one study, when women substituted yam for rice in like 2 out of 3 meals, and this was an Asian study, what the research showed was that the group that had the yam had some changes in estrogen. They actually had improvements in estrogen levels and also helped with the metabolism of estrogen, which is also important to consider. Carrots. That's the obvious one, right? Carrots contain carotenoids like alpha and beta carotene. There is a study, epidemiological studies that suggest that dietary carrots is associated with lower rates of breast and prostate cancer. So there might be some association here with estrogen metabolism. And here's my favorite, orange fruits. The citrus family, if we think about mandarins, oranges, tangerines, and even tropical fruits like papaya and peaches and persimmons, these fruits, they're all round, they're circles, they're spheres, they're orange, like ovaries, right? So they contain many different nutrients. And in fact, for women that had more of certain foods that contain one of the carotenoids, beta-cryptozanthin, and this primarily comes from things like tangerines and oranges, that they had a delayed menopause, that they could actually keep their ovaries, the health of their ovaries longer before the ovaries declined. And then also, there was another study, a larger study, that showed that there was a connection between having more fruit, especially citrus fruits that were higher in one of the carotenoids known as beta-cryptozanthin, and having a lower risk of endometriosis. So this is a little bit more on that study specifically. So this was in over 70,000 premenopausal women. The researchers found that there was an inverse association between higher fruit consumption and lower risk of endometriosis. And they found that having 1 or more servings of citrus fruits per day was associated with a 22% lower endometriosis risk compared to the group that was consuming less than 1 serving per week. So it's good to have an occasional orange citrus fruit, especially if you're a woman, because it may be protective for the reproductive system. And this is the other study that I mentioned, looking at premenopausal women that were followed for a little bit more than 12 years. And what the researchers found was that both beta-cryptozanthin and fruit intake was associated with a significant delay in the onset of natural menopause. So making sure that if you want to keep your ovaries working and maximized and healthy and don't accelerate their aging, get things like mandarins, oranges, and peaches in order to give you that carotenoid beta-cryptozanthin for the health of your ovaries. Not many people know about this, actually. So what I did was I made a graphic for social media so that people, and I got a lot of response to this because there's so much talk right now about menopause, right? And people want to know, what can I do? What can I do to help my body be more fit and optimal? And I don't want to age quickly. Well, there is something about these phytochemicals that help us with healthy aging, especially of our reproductive tract. And for men, I would also say that orange and red foods are important for red foods, especially for prostate health. So back to the tomatoes, back to the pink grapefruit, very important for prostate. And men need to be thinking about that as well. The other thing is higher intake of one of those carotenoids from orange foods is also associated with lower body mass index and lower body fat. So there's something, again, when you think of carotenoids, for the most part, think of the fat tissue of the body. The fat tissue of the body also makes hormones. That's why I'm connecting all these dots with orange, carotenoids, fat tissue, ovaries, testes, reproductive health. So when you see orange, be thinking of healthy reproduction and even post-menopause, making sure that you have healthy body fat. It's also important for the skin. So to me, having a lot of these fruits helps, especially during the summertime when they're in season, it helps to build the skin from within. It's like an internal sunscreen, right? Especially if you have fair skin and you put on a lot of sunscreen, which a lot of sunscreens are very toxic. What's really important is to fortify the skin from within with these plant foods. Now, you may still need sunscreen, obviously, but at least do your part to be eating these plant foods to protect your skin from oxidative damage from the ultraviolet light. And it doesn't matter your skin color, but some people are a little bit more prone and a little bit more sensitive to those effects, of course. And the skin might turn a little bit of a different tinge, like I talked about with my mother. But for the most part, in general, that's not a toxic condition. The body will eventually break that down. But there is a medical condition where some people cannot break down beta carotene and it starts to accumulate. But that's more rare. All right, I'm going to speed it up a little bit. I know Michael's probably waiting to ask me some questions, and we've got 30 more minutes. So I want to get through the rest of the colors. Yellow is the gut color. I see it as part of the digestive fire. It's like the fire element. And so when I think of yellow foods, I think of things like bioflavonoids. I think of detoxification with the bile, with the stomach acid. I think about foods that are rich in fiber to help with glycemic impact, right? Because we don't want to spike blood sugar. We want to have a smooth rolling hill of release of sugar into our bloodstream. And also, some of these yellow foods will help us with acid and enzymes, which will help us with secretions. And that's where I'll talk about ginger. So here's a short list. Now, keep in mind that yellow is a color that is very predominant in processed foods. We think of yellow breads, yellow pastas, yellow cookies, yellow, all kinds of starchy kind of processed foods, right? I'm talking about more natural foods. So even though I have corn here, I'm talking about fresh corn. I'm talking not about corn tortillas or corn chips or, I'm not talking about the processed varieties here. I'm talking about the actual whole foods. So when you look at this list, keep that in mind. And so a lot of these yellow foods being important because they can act as an antioxidant, help with digestive health, enzymatic activity, motility of the gut, which is important. You don't want your gut to slow down. You want it just right, the Goldilocks of the gut. You want a healthy gut microbiome and to have healthy glycemic impact. All right, so I'm going to shine a light on certain of the yellow foods. I love ginger. Ginger is one of those things. It's like turmeric where you can have the root, or you can also have the powder. You can have the spice. You can have ginger tea. Ginger has traditionally been used for gastrointestinal disorders, especially the upper part of the gut. So like stomach upset or nausea or dyspepsia or just like this kind of feeling of dis-ease or uneasiness in the upper part, right? So one of the ways that it may work is through its anti-inflammatory effects, but it also has certain compounds that may stimulate the emptying of the stomach so that things don't hang out in the stomach too long and then start to create an overgrowth. Citrus fruits, lemons. We just talked about oranges. Now let's move over to lemons. Lemons have their benefit, and what we see is that when you add some lemon juice to a starch meal, that you can help to reduce the glycemic impact pretty significantly by 20 to 50%. The intake of citrus fruits has been shown to be associated with reduced risk of esophageal, right, and gastric cancer. So again, upper GI. These protective phytonutrients against the gastric ulcer risk would be, there are certain compounds. These are the bioflavonoids, hesperidin, nobiletin, and rutin. And we know that there are some metabolic effects of citrus-based phytonutrients like naringenin, which you would find in like a yellow grapefruit. Pineapple is fantastic. In fact, pineapple juice, like a little bit, can be important for having after a meal in order to help with the breakdown of whatever's kind of sitting around, because it contains bromelain, which is a proteolytic enzyme, so it breaks down protein. And with all of the craze on protein, everybody's wanting more and more protein, right, in their diets. But the key is that you have to be able to break down protein and digest it. Pineapple has enzymes to help that. And plus, there have been other studies, animal studies, looking at its anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, antibiotic potentiation, also good for parasites, anti-diarrheal, anti-ulcer. I mean, look at all of these great gut effects, right? Just from pineapple. Of course, best to have it fresh when possible. Bananas and plantains. Now, depending on the degree of how ripe the banana or the plantain is, it can contain prebiotic fiber. So if you get a greenish banana, that's going to give you more in the way of prebiotic fiber. So it won't have as much sugar, it'll have more fiber, and that's more of what you want. And there was one neat study looking at 80 different foods and looking to see which foods were highest in serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter of happiness. And the researchers found plantains, bananas, and pineapple were at the top of the list. They're all yellow. Yellow is the color of happiness, actually. When people are asked about how they feel when they see the color yellow, many people say, oh, it makes me feel happy. It's like the sun. So we don't know if eating those foods makes us happier, but they are higher in serotonin. All right. And this just shows you that, right? So looking at the high serotonin level of plantain, pineapple, and banana. So kind of interesting. Saffron is kind of a yellowish, orangish spice. It's pretty expensive, but it does contain certain components that may help with reducing metabolic syndrome and also help with things like mood. And we know that much of our gut health determines how we feel. There is this concept called beiging. And what that means is that certain spices and certain plant compounds can actually take and transform white colored adipose tissue, which is just kind of the storage fat, and transform it into more metabolically active mitochondrial rich fat. And so it's like heating up the fat and creating more thermogenic, or creating, I would say, fat tissue that actually works for you. So there are more and more of these different plant compounds, but I do think that there's something to this whole thing about certain phytochemicals helping with that beiging or that browning process, helping us to have healthy mitochondria in our adipose tissue. Okay, for those of you who wanted green and who like green like I do, there's a lot on green. Green foods, like I mentioned, are in the, I would say, the largest supply. And when we think of green, you think of the heart. I know some people think of red when they think of the heart, but actually when it comes to nutrition, a lot of the green foods contain the nutrients for cardiovascular health. So things like vitamin K. Now, there are different forms of vitamin K. The vitamin K that I'm talking about is vitamin K1, folate, magnesium, potassium, and even dietary nitrates. So a lot of these green foods also contain more fiber, so they can bind to certain foods and certain toxins in certain foods. So when I think of green, I think of different fibers, whether it's chlorella, I'm thinking of just different sulfur containing foods. Garlic is not necessarily green, but if we're thinking of like whether it's the green onions, scallions, things of that nature, kind of thinking of the garlic onion family. Cilantro, which sometimes is referred to as coriander, making a soup of that, and that is helpful for binding things like toxic elements. Green tea, making sure that we get that epigallocatechin gallate. Just matcha is also great. Green vegetables. These are just binders in general, but you can see that a number of them are green. So when I think of green fruits, we've got a list there, but there are definitely a lot of choices. Well, depending on how you define a fruit or a vegetable, we could actually put cucumber over in fruit because it has seeds. But basically, there's a lot here to choose from and a lot of different things that those green fruits and vegetables are doing. One of the things that makes them green is the chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll is an antioxidant. And if you just zoom in for a minute here, you see how this is chlorophyll right here. I have it circled. In the middle of chlorophyll, you have what? You have magnesium. So that's how we get magnesium and chlorophyll both, which is like a wonderful twofer to have because they're both very protective and much needed in our bodies. And what ends up happening is that chlorophyll can bind. You see the green of chlorophyll here. You can't see green. It is on either side of this one in the middle. But you can see how chlorophyll is a great binder. So if there are things that come in and do damage to the gut, that's why chlorophyll, bringing that in, can help to bind and carry it out of the body and then help to reduce the inflammation in the gut. So leafy greens like spinach would be a source of many nutrients, especially naturally occurring nitrates, which help with nitric oxide synthesis. They help to reduce blood pressure, enhance blood flow, help with muscle oxygenation, and even improve exercise tolerance. Think about things like, if you're looking for nitrates, think about celery, cress, chervil, different lettuces, spinach, rocket. But just note that if you are sensitive to oxalates and you are an oxalate stone former, right? And sometimes, that might be connected to your gut microbiome as well and not being able to break down oxalic acid. You just want to watch your consumption of leafy greens, things like Swiss chard and spinach. So this is just a list of some of the nitrate containing foods. You can see again, the ones that are pretty high are at the bottom. So again, this is for heart health. This is what is helping your blood vessels to expand. Some of my favorites, because I teach a lot on detoxification, would be cruciferous vegetables. Yes, the stinky sulfur-containing vegetables like Brussels sprouts, also cauliflower, not necessarily green, but kale and different greens of different kinds like watercress, right? So there is some good data to suggest that intake of cruciferous vegetables is associated with reduced cardiovascular mortality. And the sulfur compounds, even though they're stinky, they're doing their job of helping toxins to be removed from the body. Sulforaphane is one of those important compounds in cruciferous veggies and seems to help modify inflammation, oxidative stress, and even blood clots. Avocados, great source of a green food. There are 8 preliminary clinical studies showing that avocado consumption helps support cardiovascular health. Well, how could that be? Well, an avocado, just even half of an avocado, believe it or not, has an appreciable amount of fiber. It's a good source of potassium. In fact, if you had a whole avocado, you are getting just you're overriding the amount that you'd get in a banana, which is 422 milligrams. So an avocado is a good source of potassium. It's a good source of folate. It's even has lutein close to the skin. Now, I just want to shine a light on this study because I think it's really interesting. This was done by Dr. David Heber's group at UCLA some years ago. It was published in 2013. And they had people eat a hamburger. And they noticed that after 2 hours after they had the hamburger, that there was increased narrowing of the blood vessels, right? The blood vessels got narrow and tight. They also found that there was an inflammatory marker that had increased at 4 hours after eating the hamburger. But when they had the people come back to the lab and then have an avocado, half of an avocado on the burger, they found that there was no change in inflammation, that increase that was initially observed was not seen when the avocado was added. Also, the avocado seemed to be helpful for keeping triglycerides low after having that burger. So I just think that's kind of interesting, right? All right, then I'm going to close our session with blue purple. I know some of you like blue purple, right? Again, blue purple is precious. It's regal. It is all about the brain. It's all about the mood, the mind, the memory, cognition. It occurs rarely in nature. And I'm just going to show you some pretty pictures of, I live in the Pacific Northwest. And I always like to post these pictures when I'm at the grocery store because it's so beautiful to see this, right? That purple carrots tend to be more nutrient dense than their orange counterparts. So this is just at my neighborhood grocery store. It doesn't always happen that we have purple carrots, but when we do, I get them because again, they are rare. Purple cauliflower, it looks like a brain. That's a good reminder that blue purple is good for the brain. So when you can choose your cauliflower, get purple. This is purple Brussels sprouts. Look at this. This is amazing that you can get the green on the outside, the purple on the inside, and they're so beautiful. Now, these don't always happen. They're not always available. But again, when they are, I definitely get them because it's almost like you're getting extra nutrition. Why buy green Brussels sprouts when you could have added polyphenols from the purple, right? So when you think of blue purple, think of the B for brain. Think of learning, think of memory, think of keeping your brain sharp. And when it comes to a lot of the blue purple foods out there, blueberries and grapes are the most well studied. We know that these blue purple compounds help with learning, memory, and mood because of some of the compounds that correlate to that color. So here are some ideas. Just even this morning, I had blackberries. You know, you really have, and I also had some raisins. What you want to do is very intentionally set out for your day thinking about the colors you're going to have, right? Make this like art. You want to color your plate. You want to be sure that you can get that blue purple variety. And in my Rainbow Diet book, I talk about blue, purple, black, because black can be part of this category as well. So Concord grape juice, this is another one of the juices that I keep in my refrigerator because I see it as medicinal and because there's so much research on it. So I'm specifically talking about Concord grape, right? So what we see in some of the research is that daily intake has been shown to improve memory in adults that have mild cognitive impairment. And that was against not having the purple grape, right? Just kind of having it against, I think they were looking at white grape juice. We also know that Concord grape juice can help with other parameters of cognition, including reactive time on an attention measure and increased calm. So it enables you to think better because you're calmer, you can devote attention. And an animal study seems that it can, what the findings from that show is that it may modulate BDNF, which is like miracle grow for the brain. It helps the neurons to better grow and develop. Blueberries are the obvious, right? And blueberries are accessible to many people. And animal studies that would give us the equivalent, would show us that having the equivalent of half a cup per day would help with cognition. There are clinical trials that show that blueberries can help cognition in older adults, especially helping them in delayed word recognition or recall. And in addition to cognitive markers, blueberries may help with mood. And this was even shown in children, just in children, even acutely, like within 6 hours, really having an impact on brain markers. So the blueberries are doing lots of different things. They're reducing DNA damage. They're helping with inflammation. They're helping with neuroplasticity, helping the neurons. They are helping the neurons to grow and develop. They are, because they're helping with the neuronal health, that is helping with the rate of things like learning. So when you can, pick purple, because even though those purple carrots look a little bit more stringy, they're not as starchy and they're more nutrient dense. All right, I'm going to just quickly kind of summarize everything that I talked about. So again, I talked about the color code of nature. I didn't talk about some of the colors like white, but I do go through that in the rainbow diet. I didn't get into blue, green, and sea plants for the thyroid, but I do talk about that in other material. So I try to tease out the rainbow in all of the different colors. But in general, you get the gist of the color code and how it tracks to the body. I do have a rainbow toolkit that you can download on my website, and it gives you 3 things. It gives you the why, what, how, and where of eating the rainbow. It then gives you an Eat the Rainbow food tracker, which children can use, older adults can use. But basically, you just put a check when you get the color, and then you get the rainbow for the day. Then here's a shopping list with all of the red, orange, yellow, and you can see from here. And so that creates the Eat the Rainbow toolkit. So if you put your phone camera on that QR code up in the top right, and you click on it, you will get a website and you can download this entire kit to use. And what you might want to do is actually print off even the shopping list and bring that shopping list with you when you go to the store, or just put it on your refrigerator so that you can be reminded of what you need to get or how you can diversify your eating, right? So I want you to be having some ideas, because some people say, well, I can't think, like, what would be a new orange food? Well, here's a list of some orange foods, and I bet you haven't had some of those in a long time. So again, you can get all of this on my website at deannaminich.com. You can just download this whole 3-part kit and use it as you like. I hope you benefit from it. I've had lots of great feedback from it. Here is also another tool for you to use if you want. This is what I call the Food and Mood Weekly Tracker. Because I mentioned that colors of food track to colors of your mood, you can see here that this is a way for you to track the colors of your food every day of the week, and then also have a section for how you felt that day. I think that that's really important. Many people overlook emotional health, and we know that emotions are a big driver of health and healing, and also can change our behaviors. So this is another thing you can download. You just put your camera phone over this QR code, you get to the actual link, you can download this, again, use it how you would like. So the rainbow diet, what is it really, right? I talked about a lot of the color aspects, but there's a lot more that I didn't talk about. Starting from the bottom and going up, I do think it's really important to personalize your eating always. What I eat is not necessarily what you need to eat or what you can eat, and vice versa. I do think it's important to look at quality protein, balancing the ratio of the different fats in the diet, having fiber-rich complex carbohydrates, looking at the timing of our meals, making sure that our foods are nutrient dense. I hope that you took away today lots of diversity and how important that is, as well as making sure that you've got color, bringing gratitude and love to your meals, being mindful, intentional, and conscious when you're eating. Don't eat mindlessly where you're in the car, you're driving, you're doing dashboard dining, right? You want to have a sense of presence and connection with that food so that it becomes a spiritual practice of really looking at the connections that you have with nature, right? With the farmers, with the land, with the sun, the moon, the stars. I mean, actually, every meal can be a connection of you physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. There are lots of different lab markers that would tell you if you had enough in the way of these different phytochemicals. Talk with your doctor about where you stand with your inflammation, how you can improve your diet, because this is just a talk here today on a Saturday, right? And I'm not your doctor. You really need to work with a team to kind of get in there and understand, how can I make a couple of tweaks to do just a little bit better so I feel better? And I'll just leave you with some ideas to increase colorful food intake, and then Michael can come on and we'll chat for a couple of minutes. But some of the things I just want to leave you with would be, again, variety and diversification. Get creative, get fun, put together some smart combinations, bring in spices and teas, grow your own food. You know what I did right before I came on to do this? I was actually in the garden. I was planting some of my starters. So I've got leafy greens, and then I have some kale. So I was actually planting that right before I came on the call. So I think it's really important to grow food, right? Because then you know what's in it. Foraging, if you live near a more wild area. So I live more in a rural area. So I'm able to do that, looking for mushrooms, looking for berries. So much good food is out there and just ready for us. I think I've stressed how important it is to have phytochemical diversity. To me, it's better to have less of more than more of fewer. And I would say that about most things in life. It's so important to have a wide breadth of life experiences, right? Get really creative with your spices. In fact, spend some time this weekend, if you can, get into your spice rack. Get away from the plastic jars. You need glass jars. They need to be in the dark. They need to be in a cool spot so that during the summertime, they don't go bad. If you take your spices and you shake them upside down and nothing moves and they're all just caked, get rid of them. Look at the expiration dates. Read the labels of your spices. Not all spices are pure. Spices are somewhat relatively expensive. And so what sometimes happens is that people that create the spices, they'll put starch in there as a filler. You don't want maltodextrin in your spices. You want the pure spice. So buy organic, buy in a glass jar. Don't go cheap on spices. This is good healing for the body in many ways. And there are many different ways to get spices, right? I have kind of this long list of all kinds of creative ways. Well, you can think of, let me just go back. Lots of different things, whether spices in your smoothies, putting them into tea, putting them into salad dressing, putting them in salads or on sandwiches, marinating, whether fish, lean meats, putting them in oatmeal. Like I had oatmeal this morning, actually, and I loaded it up with spices, pumpkin seeds, pecans, walnuts, berries, chia seeds. I mean, it was so full with other things that it was almost not even oatmeal anymore because it had so many other things. And lots of other things here, honeys, oils, salts, and sprinkles. So get your daily smoothie. If you have a difficult time getting in, I would say, a nutrient-dense diet, figure out if you can make a smoothie, put some protein and healthy fat in it so it's not all sugar. Get the fiber, add in the fiber to the smoothie. I have another book called Whole Detox, and I take you through a 21-day program with colorful smoothies in order to get all of that nutrient density. Drink tea. Some of the longest living cultures on the planet, I think in part, are long living because they take the time for tea. And tea and coffee are actually chock full of phytochemicals. So get the rainbow of tea so that you get different phytochemicals, right? It's not just green tea, lots of studies on green tea, but believe it or not, there's also passion fruit tea, rooibos tea, it's red, hibiscus tea, great for the heart, honeybush, thyme, antiviral, chamomile, calming, lemon ginger for the gut. Remember, the yellow is for the gut, right? So get that rainbow so that the rainbow is seen in many different food categories. And this is just looking at tea and antioxidants. And look at this. This is looking at Chinese teas. And this is looking at fruits and vegetables, flowers. Look at how high tea can be in antioxidant capacity. So never underestimate tea. In fact, let your tea steep very long. Let it get a little bitter if you can. Try not to add anything to it. No sweetener. Just have it as it is in its medicinal form. Making soups, whatever kind of soup you like, make that. Bring in sea plants if you can, some kelp. Make them mineral rich. Different colors of food. This is one way to get diversity. I actually had quinoa for lunch today with a bit of salmon, and it kind of looked like this actually. So having something warm, quinoa is rich in protein. This can be important for just, again, aiding in digestion. We don't want to overcook things. You can actually find this handout on my website if you want to use this to understand what are the pros, what are the cons of eating foods raw, steamed, boiled, or with dry, hot heat, right? What happens? So you can get that there. If you want, bring in a little bit of citrus to your green tea because they can be like a synergy there. Bring black pepper together with turmeric and some kind of oil like extra virgin olive oil. And when you are eating vegetables like garlic, or if you have carrots or broccoli, when you cut it up into really small pieces and let it sit for about 15 minutes if you can, because you actually get more compounds in that way. Find people that share your same feelings and practices around food, right? Because your community will determine how you eat. So when we are eating alone, many times what the science shows is that there's less diversity, less veggies. And for men who are widowed, they have even less opportunity, or they're not engaging in eating these foods. So bring in people that eat like you, because then you'll continue to eat like you want, which is colorful and diverse. And if nothing else, what I would say is eat vegetables, not just because they're good for you, eat them because they are gorgeous. They are nature's art. So eat the rainbow for your inner rainbow, right? We talked a lot about that today. Think about what your 3 takeaways are. What are you going to take away from this 2-hour talk today, right? There's a lot of information there. If it's too much for you to remember, you can get my Rainbow Diet book. I also have, this is the whole detox book, which has the 21-day program in it with menus, with shopping lists, and it will guide you through the whole colorful process. So I want to thank you. I know I came right up against the hour here, so not a lot of time for questions. Sorry about that, Michael.
No worries. So you went through a lot, so you gave us a lot of information, which is the important thing. So yeah, we basically have like 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask one question, and I have to pick a good one, which is, if you had to pick 5 things to eat out of all of the rainbow that you think would be the most impactful to our health, what would those 5 things be? And you can be any number, but.
Okay. Well, I want to start with blue purple because blue purple is the color that we get in least supply. So I would say blueberries. I would say green tea. I would say broccoli. I want to pick a yellow. I'm going to say lemon. And believe it or not, I'm going to say cocoa. I know that I'll make a lot of people happy if I say cocoa. I'm not saying chocolate. I'm saying cocoa. We didn't get to talk about brown, but brown can be important for the mood and the brain health as well. So I talk more about that in the Rainbow Diet.
And are you saying cocoa, or cacao? Like, would
Well, most people aren't as familiar with cacao, so cacao would be like the ultimate. So if you can
Okay.
get raw cacao powder, absolutely. And then I would say, if not, then a follow-up to that would be a cocoa powder. So just bringing in those cocoa flavonoids is important.
all right,
You know what,
great. Well,
that's funny you would ask me that, because I often ask people that if you were stranded on a desert island, you know what? I'm going to take back, one more food. I'm going to say turmeric, and I want to say ginger. Because
that's
if I
too much.
want to survive, I know. Maybe I'll take away the lemon, and I might
No,
take.
no, no, no. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. Sure.
It's hard, but at least those are some colorful foods, and they would get you pretty far.
All right. Oh, I feel good. Those are things that I eat regularly. So it just made my day. All right. Well,
Great.
thank you so much. And you already shared how people can get in contact with you, through the various methods you mentioned. So I want to thank you for all the information that you shared with us today. And I think it was last night, or 2 nights ago, I'm not even sure. And if we could unmute the audience, please. So they can-
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
I truly enjoyed that.
Anytime I order the call,
Thank you.
I'm gonna go ahead and read it.